Hello and welcome back to Talking Out of Line, a show that you know is about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Today's episode will be focusing on technology and DEIB. Our special guest is Jeff Orlowski-Yang, who's a two-time Emmy Award-winning filmmaker and founder of production company Exposure Labs. We're going to focus on Social Dilemma, which is one of his most viewed documentaries in Netflix history that speaks about technology and inclusion.
Jeff has been a successful Asian American documentary filmmaker for the past 15 years. His films focus on change, whether that be climate or social. His films have been nominated and won awards in the Sundance Film Festival, the Academy, and Emmys, which are big accomplishments. Other awards include the Peabody Award and even the United Nations Champion of Earth Award. During the interview, he speaks about his experiences in the industry as an independent filmmaker, which is quite a journey.
And Chasing Ice was his first critically acclaimed documentary, releasing in 2005. Its main claim was looking at climate change and about an environmental photographer going to record the rapid change of glaciers around the world. His second film, Chasing Coral, focused on the adventure undergone by scientists to record the rapid disappearance of coral reefs. This film was picked up and mass distributed by Netflix, giving it a massive audience and following. His latest film, The Social Dilemma, tries to warn people about the negative impacts of social networking used by big tech companies to manipulate the public. The film was also picked up and largely distributed by Netflix. His love for the field and storytelling has pushed him to help the community and offer one-on-one meetings with other filmmakers and people in the industry through his company, Exposure Labs.
As always, before we jump into this interview between Fadia and Jeff, let's look at a few statistics about technology, filmmaking, and DEIB. While 7.7% of the labor force in the US works in tech, only about 25% of those jobs are taken by women. 83.3% of all tech executives are white. And research has proven that companies with radically diverse teams outperform those lacking diversity by nearly 35%.
And here's some data on the STEM field in general. At Facebook, only 2.1% of tech jobs are held by Black employees. 62% of Black workers and 42% of Hispanic workers reported that they had experienced discrimination in their tech workplace. Black engineers are paid significantly less than engineers of all other backgrounds, earning 13% less than white engineers. If you look at some of these numbers, it looks quite appalling because, as we know, there is no relationship between our racial background and our abilities to perform at work. However, this disparity and this inequality seems to be showing up in the tech workplace in pretty precarious ways.
For more insight on the movements in DEIB and tech, you can check out the Center for Humane Tech, an organization that works on radically reimagining our digital infrastructure. Their drive is to achieve a comprehensive shift towards humane technology that supports our well-being, democracy, shared information environment.
So I have interacted with the Center for Humane Tech in a variety of different ways. And in fact, I'm currently enrolled in their Foundations for Social Media professional development course, which I find really, really helpful for anyone who's interested in finding out from an industry perspective ways in which we can humanize technology. So it's a free course. It's on their website, and I would highly recommend it for anyone who's interested in an 8-part course that they can do from their home to know more about this world. So thank you all for watching this intro. Now, without further ado, we are going to get into the interview with Jeff Orlowski-Yang, who's going to talk to us about tech and inclusion and social dilemma. Thank you all. So thank you so much, Jeff, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us and our audience to talk a little bit about your movie and everything that you're involved in these days when it comes to work related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your projects, and your film Social Dilemma, which I loved so much, which spoke about technology and inclusion.
Yeah, thank you, Fadia. It's great to meet you. It's great to be here for your show. I am a filmmaker. I've been doing documentary films for the last 15 years. I feel older and older now, but most of our projects have been on climate change. That's where we started with a film called Chasing Ice and then Chasing Coral. And our most recent film, The Social Dilemma, came out in 2020. And we focused on the impacts of technology and specifically big social and social media and the advertising, the surveillance advertising business model, and the impact that all of that is having on society, which are vast. So that's been the stuff that we've been thinking about lately.
Sounds good. So tell us a little bit about how Social Dilemma came about and what made you interested in doing a project on technology and inclusion. It's such a hot topic, and so many of my students, since I'm an educator also, are thinking about it, writing about it, talking about it, presenting about it. So tell us what got you interested in it.
As I mentioned, my team and I, we were working a lot on climate change, and we had this worldview around how big of a threat climate change is to society, to humanity all around the planet. And in 2017, I started to hear whispers from friends of mine who worked in tech about a criticism of technology. Now, 2017, it was 5 years ago. It seems it wasn't that long ago in some ways, and yet at the same time, in 2017, nobody was really criticizing social media publicly. It was still the darling of Silicon Valley. Everybody loved it. It was nothing but positive affirmation about what technology was doing to society. And I had started to hear from friends that there was a big problem there. One of my friends referenced this as a climate change of culture, that we don't even realize it, but invisibly, the technology that we interact with every day is changing society. It's changing our culture. It's changing how we understand the world. It's changing what information we get, what information we have access to. And first of all, that's happening in very inequitable ways all across the board. But that was the thing that was a light bulb for me, was to realize, wait a second, like I didn't realize this. I was using Facebook and social media every day and I loved it. And I thought it was nothing but positive for my life and my experience. And it was a huge wake up call. So that's what set us out on this journey to investigate and to explore and to see what story there was to unfold here. And here we are, and it took us, 3.5 years to make The Social Dilemma, and we released it, and something that our whole team is very proud of.
Sounds great. I, for one, watched the documentary without having anyone assign it to me. But since then, I have assigned it to all of my classes that have relevance to social media, and students have loved it. It's not only a well-made documentary, but it's also very much hard-hitting on the topics, as I said, that Gen Z is interested in, on mental health, body image issues, and sort of social isolation, and all of the things that people are experiencing as a result of, I would say, social media addiction. So when this movie came out, what was your sort of expectation of the kind of response you'll be receiving from the public? And what has been sort of some surprises? What has been expected? Tell us a little bit about the audience reaction.
Yeah, I mean, I think you always make a movie hoping that it'll get out there in a really, really big way. And this film went above and beyond anything we could have expected or hoped. It is one of the most viewed documentaries on Netflix in their history. It did incredibly well, and a lot of people saw the film. It's been engaged by countless politicians, by countless schools, by countless youth groups. Our team hosted a lot of events with politicians as well. Part of what we do at Exposure Labs, our company, is that we not only make films and make the stories, but we also then do impact campaigns. And we do a lot of work to support the films out in the world, and how do we get them out there in a wider way. And so our team was overwhelmed with inbound requests. I mean, it was drinking from the fire hose when this film released. And so many people reached out, and we're still just recovering from that from almost 2 years ago. So the response to the film, it went all around the world, and we had such deep conversations with the communities all around the world. And from everything I understand from our partners that work in tech and that are out there in the field doing this work every day, it really shifted the conversation around social media, where a lot of our partners say, you know, I used to have to explain what I do all the time. And now when the social dilemma came out, I could just jump into like, and this is what we need to do. And this is how it helps advance their work. So that was incredibly satisfying and fulfilling to hear those reflections.
Absolutely, because sometimes you theoretically and anecdotally talk to people about impacts and negative impacts of social media. And here you have like a text that is a visual text rather than some peer-reviewed article that no one wants to read. And you can be like, did you watch that? It's on Netflix. And let's talk about it after watching what we watched. So I think it's a great reference point that, I mean, I've been personally successful with that movie in explaining a lot of issues around social media and impacts in my classes, in my personal life, through your as an educational tool. So it's been amazing. So what has been some pushback? I'd love to know about that as well. Has there been?
Yeah, there's been some pushback, and legitimately so. I mean, one of the things that I've realized in the process is that the field of tech is it's so nuanced. There's so much complexity here. There's a lot of different issues within the field of technology right now. And there are different organizations and different partners that have a different lens on what the problem is and what the solutions are. You know, we were really trying to comment specifically on the issue of the business model. The surveillance advertising business model was a thing that we were looking at. And for me, the lens of sense making, misinformation, how do we understand what we know? That whole field of study is what we were seeing, that I was seeing was a really, really big theme. So there are a lot of themes within technology that we didn't touch. I think some people were upset and disappointed that the film didn't reflect on some of those additional themes. There are other films that I always love talking about as well that are dear friends of ours and we've partnered with on many occasions. Talking specifically about diversity, equity, inclusion, there's a film called Coded Bias from Shalini Kantaya.
I've seen it.
It's a brilliant film. She talks more about algorithms, not about social media and about big social, but around algorithmic bias and how algorithms affect society, how algorithms are impacting different populations of people in different ways, built into the bias, built into the data. So that's just a really, really beautiful example of you know, a whole storyline that we didn't put in the social dilemma. We didn't have time, and it was a bit of a different focus. There are countless things that I think we could have included as well, but that's one of the challenges when you're making a film like that.
Absolutely, and I think it was really interesting that how you had the reenactment segment in it, which really sort of personalized the whole thing. And I loved that approach of docu-film communication, because I feel that it really gets people into scenarios, into identities, and sort of normal experiences that people have in their families, with their friends, with their family members. Like, oh yeah, I see that happening all the time. And what does that really mean? So that was great. And what I want to also ask you is, I understand from you that you're an Asian American filmmaker. How do you set out as a minority filmmaker in the United States, tackling a theme like technology and inclusion, which is, I think it takes some guts to do that on platforms?
Yeah, I don't, where to even start with this. I really appreciate your question, and it's a really big question.
Because it's sort of like, okay, here you go. Here's a field that is largely dominated by white males. And then you have a director who has a different identity.
I think part of that is not only is the tech field dominated by white men, but the film industry is dominated by white men. And that's where I'm not sure where you were going with your question, but it's challenging in countless ways. I mean, part of this too is just the challenge of making a film in general is incredibly difficult. We did this film independently. So I have found, we've been fortunate enough through some of the support that we've had, and in large part, we've had a lot of support from the Sundance Institute, that when we have pursued making our films, we have found people who believe in me and my team and our team and the vision that we have for the stories that we want to tell and the way that we want to tell them. I don't think I would have been able to pitch this film to Netflix and be able to make the film that we wanted to make originally. We made the film independently. We released it at a film festival, and that's where Netflix then bought the film. So there's a huge challenge in the film industry around getting your ideas funded. And what the gatekeepers at countless different studios and the way they see the world and the way you see the world. I feel that tension on a regular, I'm feeling that tension right now on some projects that I want to do. And the stories that I want to tell aren't necessarily the stories that the executives are always seeing and resonating with. So the tension and the challenge there becomes one of like, well, how do you make your story? How do you get it done? I've had countless amazing advisors. I think that's been a big part of my ability to do this work, has been through great advisorship from countless people who have taught me so much about the industry and how to get through, how to break through. And a lot of that is finding people who have believed in enough to support the work that we wanted to make. We could spend hours just talking about this one question, but that's like the quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you answered it in honesty, because a lot of people will be watching this show. As you'll see, one of the things that I'll be asking you a little bit later is that there's people who want to do this work, and there are people of minority identities who want to work on issues that are challenging and controversial. And you are giving a great inspiration and a great model for, okay, great. You believe in something, you find your ways of making it happen and doing it. And the fact that you explained your structure of the fact that it was independent, and then it was shown in a film festival, and then Netflix bought it from there. All of that is such amazing information that you need to be creative and entrepreneurial if you want to work out.
A lot of this is, there's so much hustle that one needs in this industry. And one of the things that I really appreciate from a lot of friends and mentors is honest feedback. And I think for me, the way I've always thought of this is, if somebody says no to my idea, I look at that as an opportunity to make the idea better. And how do I take that feedback and how do I refine that? And there's this mantra that I had, like literally on my computer when I was in college. It was a phrase that some friends always talked about. It was a phrase that said, "Be so good they can't ignore you." And I took it to heart. And when I would do work on something and it got rejected, whether from film festivals or from funders, my response was just to keep working harder and to keep putting the time and effort and dedication in, and to make it good enough so that people would see the value and the opportunity there. I think my whole team, we have a persistence, a dog-headed persistence that we will push through with. I think that's what's served me in my career and my path. And it's something where recognizing how difficult these industries are, especially if you're a person of color, especially if you're an underrepresented population. How do you work? We have to put the extra time and effort in. We have to put that labor in to get our ideas through and to break through. And I know I've taken that on as a burden in my mind. But that's what's paid off.
Yeah. So let me ask you now more of a philosophical question. So what does diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mean to you as a filmmaker, as an activist, and as a creator?
Yeah. I think the first thing I would start actually for my team. My company Exposure Labs, we're 18 people, and we are continuing to grow and grow. And I think one of the big things is, let me start with belonging, because within like Jedi lenses or DEIB, like the notion of inclusion and belonging, when does somebody feel like they actually truly can be themselves? in a community. I've felt that in some communities, and I haven't felt that in other communities. I think that's, for me, also being of mixed ancestry, I have always felt like an insider and an outsider at the same time. And to be able to recognize when and why and how, I actually do feel I can truly be myself. It's a challenge to foster those spaces for others. It's something that I'm constantly working on. I think it's something that requires attention. That's something that our whole team is really, really studying and practicing and growing. And how do we create more and more space for inclusion and true belonging amongst a team of people? I think it's something where if you're not intentional about it, if you're not paying attention to it, then what happens is it drifts to different defaults for different team members. And then it becomes something that is often the case, not a space of belonging and not a space of inclusion. So it really requires focused effort from an entire team of people to create truly inclusive spaces.
So tell me a little bit about how this theme played out in your creation of the content for Social Dilemma. So
Yeah.
was it, because it, to me, even though it's about technology and big social, really a lot of what the movie to me and the experience was about was diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as a theme. Like, how do we actually, what do we know about the big social that is out in the public, and what needs to happen for it
Right.
to create equity, for there to be true representation of different communities and a sense of belonging and inclusion in it. So tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about how that sort of intersects with your product.
Where to start? So many. First of all, I love your questions, Fadia. I'm really appreciating this. Just the very first reflection is that it was incredibly difficult at the start of the project to find tech insiders and people who are willing to speak out about tech that were people of color. The industry, and especially in 2017, it was before tech sort of had a bit of their own racial reckoning. They have been shifting. I do want to give them credit that they've been shifting more and more to recognize lack of diversity within the tech industry. And they have been slowly and steadily, but certainly not enough, but they've been making progress on building out more diverse teams. I think the concepts around algorithmic bias and all of that coming to the surface a couple of years ago really put a spotlight on it, and the tech companies recognized the bias that existed within their leadership. And when we started making the film, most of the people that we met who worked in tech were white men. And certainly the people who were willing or able to speak out or were willing to criticize the companies that made them wealthy or the companies that they still worked at in some cases. Those were, in many cases, white men that were speaking out about it. So our team did a lot of work to try to find people beyond that. And we found a handful of really, really beautifully talented, capable, smart academics, activists, people working in the movement to round out that story and to give us other lenses and to give a different perspective on the issues. And then through that process, we had the whole narrative storyline that you mentioned. And that was a place where we had flexibility and creativity around, like, how are we going to cast these roles? Who are we going to put in the film as we were talking through different issues? So that's the quick answer.
Well, thank you. And I think I'm actually wondering when I'm going to edit this show that whether I should even call it just technology, because it could almost be like technology, filmmaking, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Right.
We're talking about content creation and narrative, and also technology. So I think we're having I'm enjoying the conversation for sure.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, how would you advocate people who want to break into this industry to find a way to get their stories heard? I know you've told us a little bit about your amazing entrepreneurial process of making this happen through film festivals and, Netflix loving your product, etc. But what's some advice you can give people who want to be you?
There are more and more growing resources within the documentary film field to support filmmakers of color and BIPOC filmmakers, to support up and coming artists and rising talent. Sundance is a big place, but there at this point, there are many, many organizations and institutions supporting filmmakers with grants. We have a bunch of those resources on our website. If you go to exposurelabs.com, another thing actually that we do as a team, if you go to our website, exposurelabs.com, you can sign up for one-on-one consulting time. So if somebody has a project that they're looking for advice on, we offer free time with whether it's our creative team, our producing team, our impact team, and people can sign up to get consulting time with the team. So there are more and more pathways to support independent artists. I don't want to make it sound like it's going to be easy, right? It's still a very, very challenging uphill battle, but I do see that these resources are growing and trying to support communities. The documentary film industry as a whole, it's a very progressive industry that is very focused on inclusion and belonging, on representation, on diversity of storytelling and storytellers, who's telling what stories and why. And so I think it's the industry's been going through a lot of changes over the last couple of years in a really beautiful, great way.
That's really positive to hear, because with the advent of people having really high quality cell phones and them being able to shoot anything anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot more interest, I think, in the creative arts and making a product and then not knowing what to do with it. So it's good to hear that there's more happening rather than less happening for people who are historically marginalized in the documentary sphere or the production sphere, pretty much.
Right.
So this is again a philosophical question, which I always like asking all of my guests, which is, did you intentionally want to do this kind of work, which has a lot of impact in issues of DEIB, or did it just happen along the way that you happen to be a champion in things related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging?
I'd say it's a blend of both in different ways. The way I've been looking at it more recently, I think there are these stories and these issues that we've been trying to put a spotlight on. And then what we hold ourselves accountable to is, what is the process in which we're telling those stories? How do we as a team live and uphold these values in the way that we do our filmmaking? And how can we use our power and our position within the industry to push the industry as a whole? In some ways, some of these practices have been a long time just always there and persistent there for me and other members of our team. In other ways, these are new practices when we're recognizing we have a lot more power in the industry than I ever felt before. I think for a long time when I was trying to break into the industry, it was constantly just an uphill battle to just raise money, right? For years and years and years, you're just trying to pitch everybody anywhere to believe in you enough to support your project, and you're always trying to raise money. And these projects are big and they're expensive and they're time consuming and they're challenging. And so in many ways, that shift from being the underdog and just trying to survive and get your project made to now being within the industry and a respected peer in the industry and having more leverage and authority, like now we're asking ourselves new questions about how do we use that power, and how do we leverage that power for greater change. Yeah.
So you sort of led me to my next question anyways, which is, so how do you sort of make sense of the acceptance that you've had with your amazing work that you've done so far? In what are sort of your priorities for the next few years when it comes to the work that you want to do, and where do we find your work for audiences to follow your work, and what are you looking at?
Yeah, I can't speak publicly about the exact stories that we're doing, but the themes that we're focusing on, it's very much a continuation of the themes that we've been looking at for all of these years. Right now, we're focusing on a 5-year slate. I want to work on, we have a long list of projects that our team wants to work on. And we're going through those same challenges of now we're going to start fundraising and how do we build this out? And how do we uphold the values that we live by within all of these projects and the work that we want to do? I think as we've continued to grow as a team and as a company, our ambition has only gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, which is both exciting and daunting. But that's where I think we make the best work. If you're not a little bit nervous and a little bit scared, you might not be pushing yourself hard enough. And so I think that's what we're focusing on as a team. Like, what are the big stories? What are the big ideas? How do we get these themes and these messages out into the world through the work that we are accomplishing?
So one of the things I want to go back to for the audience is we're going to be having links and images from social media, from Social Dilemma in this episode, so that's the audience knows where to go to find it if they haven't seen it already. And I wanted to know if there are sections in your documentary you really would want people to watch and pay attention to. What would those sections be?
Oh,
From the filmmaker's cut.
There's like one of the most complicated sections of the film is explaining the business model and how it actually works. And that's where we really start to introduce the AI as a character and seeing behind the computer screen. And I still think that's a really essential thing for people to wrap their heads around. This is not as innocent as we think it is. And there's a much more nefarious process going on behind the scenes. And then also the mental health section and the impacts, especially on Gen Z and on youth. That's some of the stuff that has me the most worried. That is the stuff that is really shifting and changing our society and an entire generation of humans. So those would be some of the most immediate places I would point people to.
Sounds good, because it always is interesting to me when I talk to creators of different media, that what is it that you want us to focus on? Because, you know,
I want you to watch the whole thing.
Yeah,
Watch
I'm sure people will, but I do agree with you that even in my teaching of social media, that part about the lack of innocence and the very intentional setup of the monetized setup, the setup where you really have an algorithm that is in place to work against you and to work for the businesses, that whole process, I think, is where students actually enjoy the most, and they're often like this reveal and understanding the depth of the whole situation is what sort of creates that sort of turning point in the classroom where students really start thinking about social media and big social in like a very different way. So I would agree with you that that whole section, I think, is the business of it is very important to understand.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think your documentary did a really good job using the scenarios that you created in the movie. Well, anything that you'd want to tell us on sort of the direction of tech and inclusion? If you ask me as a viewer, I would want you to make a part 2 in a few years. That's what I think should happen, because it's an evolving field, social media. And I really feel like people who have received your level of success when it comes to having people watch a documentary and use it in so many different ways, I'm rooting for a follow-up.
Right. Yes. We are going to be releasing soon short form content that is a bit of a follow-up to the film. So what we're looking at is, as opposed to making another feature right now, what we are looking at are short videos to continue to keep pressure on the tech companies that address these issues, that go into other issues that we didn't talk about in the film, to bring more voices to the table, to really explore additional stories that are out there. So you can go to our website, exposurelabs.com. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can see that content as it comes out. And we're just in the process of making that right now. So it'll still be a little while before we start releasing stuff, but there is more that will be coming.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for spending some time with us to talk about your project, your upcoming work, and sort of your
Yeah.
process behind creating a documentary that is so much in opposition to where the culture is going. And I love the use of the term, it's sort of the climate change of, what was it?
Climate change of culture.
Climate change of culture.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Love that. Love that catchphrase. I think that's going to stick with us. And yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks so much, Fadia.
Great, thanks.